So, guys, I want to start another video series, and I want to call it Ghetto Experienced Trauma or Black Trauma. And that ultimately means that when a person has a bad experience around somebody who's African American, or, like the thugs, the hoods, the niggas, and whatever, really. And I also want to mention that I've had bad experiences around all races. And I know as somebody who's part African American, I'm one of those people that definitely want to just be more critical of the thug and the hood nigga and the gangsta stereotype, really. Because, definitely there needs to be a lot more shaming of that culture. And there also needs to be talks about, why some people are self hating black people or why, some people feel the way they do about members of their own race, really. And I also will have to reiterate every single time I do this that I've been treated very poorly by people of all races. When I went to college, I had a bunch of Jewish professors call me a nigger and use the word nigger around me and treat me and say things like, oh, well, there's Byron the black kid. I did the 48-hour film project and I met some really nasty white people. Like, I remember, the first year I did it, some people were saying, oh, it's great that a black guy's doing it. Well, is it that blacks work with blacks? And the president of competition, he did nothing I when I talked about these issues. So it was exactly like what we see in a lot of white privilege, where you be disrespectful to people of color. There's no consequences and whatever, really. So I think in my first video, I want to talk about, you know, um, my summer camp experience when I was abused by my camp counselors. So when I was a kid in the 1990s, I went to Albany School of Humanities, and I would go to summer camp, and I always hated summer camp because I'm a very nonconformist type of person, really. So, sometimes you have parents who have the mentality of, oh, well, I think there were some kind of summer camps that were free. Like, it's almost like, people, it's part of it's an extension of an after school program, or it's an extension of public school. And then the other part of it is also, too, that, I was misdiagnosed with autism, and my brother was diagnosed with autism, even though it could be a misdiagnosis because we both struggle with social skills based on trauma and a home life that gave us a bunch of anxiety. So, you have those parents that are like the war against autism, which means we're going to force you to be in very social situations, and we're going to be really harsh about it. So that way, it's going to motivate you to just overcome your autism. Exposure therapy, where somebody's afraid of something, you put them in that environment or you intimidate them to be in that environment to help them overcome, really, when that can help and that can actually not help, really. So when I went to summer camp, I had to be around 8 or 9 years old, and I had a bunch of camp counselors that abused me, and my brother also abused me as well, really. Like, my brother was 10 years old, really. So what happened was he would do things like there would be like this like spinning merry-go-round type of thing, really. So what he would do is that, when me and other little kids were on, really, he would spin it fast as he could, really. And the reason why he would do that is that we would have to jump off or else we would throw up, really. And what would happen was that our legs would get hooked into that, and then we would like bang on the ground. And my brother had like something called Tom and Jerry syndrome. That's a term I made up, really, which is that when somebody gets hurt, he just throws his head in the air and he laughs very, very hard, really. Like, it's almost like, hilarious. I remember one time in middle school, I got upset with him for doing that. I remember hitting him with a wooden bat to try to teach him, just, okay, since you like laughing at people getting hurt, here we go, really. I remember like one time, my dad smacked him across the head, really, because my dad hurt himself, while he was repairing something, and then he smacked my brother in the head because my brother had that Tom and Jerry issue of when somebody gets hurt, it's hysterical, really, or when you hurt somebody, or you cause somebody to bleed, or you cause somebody to get someone close to a concussion, it is the funniest thing in the world, really. And the other thing is that we were adopted out of an abusive situation. So maybe my biological mother was abusive to him to a point where he learned that when other people get hurt, it's like America's Funniest Home Videos. When actually he needed to be taught, no, you don't do that. You treat people right, really. Like when people get hurt, it's not cool. So it's ultimately like and this is what this part of this video series is talking about stereotypical black behavior or how black behavior influences people. So, the fact that my mother had mental health issues, she was part black and part Native American, and she believed on violence and whooping a kid. Really, my brother kind of inherited that type of using violence in a way of his behavior, really, and that's not cool, really, because we have to understand too that um, as people who have black heritage, when we use violence or excessive violence on children, or think the only way to respond to them is whooping them and beating them, we're passing down ways to treat children. Um, you know, we're teaching our children to be violent and ghetto and sociopathic about how they treat others. So I want to talk about the other part, which was my camp counselors. So I remember, before I start, really, I remember, saying stuff like, I want to be president of the United States. And my camp counselors would say things like, boy, this kid wants to grow up to be shot, really. And the reason why they said that was because this was the 90s, and a lot of black people felt that a black person could not be president because, a lot of people still had that thing about Martin Luther King, being shot for standing up for black people, really. So a lot of people who were black felt that way, that black people can never be successful. And another thing was that I was always really smart, and I was always really educated, and I would always watch PBS and Schoolhouse Rock and other things. So I was always that really, really smart kid, really. And I got bullied by my camp counselors because of that, and other things as well, really. And that's kind of an issue in the black community as well, really, where if there's a black kid who's smart, really, we kind of do the Urkel thing where we bully them, we kick their asses. We're like, oh, well, you think you're better than me. Or sometimes what happens is that people will treat them poorly because you want to see them get angry and act ghetto as well, really. You're almost I need to break your spirit. And I think that stems from a couple of things. I think that stems from that generational trauma of what happened to black people. Because obviously during the slavery days, if there was a black person that was smart, they would be killed. Or if they tried to read a book, they would be killed, really. Or many times when there have been African Americans trying to be successful, Black Wall Street and a lot of other neighborhoods, they would have their neighborhoods burned down. Or how I've experienced that when I've been around white people who, in the 48-hour film project, people give you bad experiences, or white people try to treat you in a very mean way because they're like, oh, well, I want to thin the herd, really. I want to bring the worst out of you. It's like what Dave Chappelle said, that, sometimes when you have this one black guy that stands out, really, or a black guy who's smart or cultured or whatever, and they're around a bunch of white people, sometimes you're in a situation where the white people would try to bring the worst in this black guy and then be like, oh, I don't know why this black guy's like that. So there's always been a sense that if there's a black person with potential, he needs to be consistently sabotaged, really. And then sometimes I think that some African Americans inherited that type of, oh, well, you know what, I just don't feel comfortable around that. And I also think that sometimes, in every culture, but definitely in black culture, there's a sense of machismo and ego. And that just means that if somebody's better than you got to take what they have, really. If somebody's smarter than you or more educated than you, instead of being nurturing, you got to be like, oh, well, you know what, this person thinks he's better than me. He's an Uncle Tom. He's a house slave. Or, oh, well, you know what, he's better than me because maybe he had his parents that tutored him or whatever and stuff like that. There's always a sense of just, ruining people who can go further, really. That's in all communities, but definitely the black community, there's a lot of that, of despising people who are really, really smart or who can do better, really. And then the other thing about it was my camp counselor's abuse. I remember, sometimes they would flick my ear. Or sometimes, when my brother would do things, like when he would swim in a pool and he would drag little kids or me into the deeper end because he thought it was funny, really, they would kind of ignore that when, obviously, even in the 1990s, there was a lot of bully culture. So when people are bullying kids or putting somebody else in danger, or when my brother would pull me or other people underwater, really, there was always just ignoring that type of behavior, really. And then also, we used to play dodgeball. So what would happen is that they would throw, these guys were football players, so they would throw dodgeball as hard as they could at our legs, or sometimes when we weren't looking or when we were helping clean up, they would just throw dodgeballs at our head. I remember one time I was helping clean up and threw a dodgeball in my head. And one of those guys like glared his eyeballs at me, and I said to myself, "What a fucking nigger!" Or these are just how black people are. They're a bunch of niggers, or they're gang members, or how these black people that are black people pick fights with children because they don't know how to fight fair. Okay? And that was the first time I ever felt like hatred towards my own race or self hate and be like, oh well, black people are just a bunch of niggers because these were just like these low end black people with tattoos, sagging pants, kind of like really ghetto, unprofessional mindset, always picking on people and always hitting on the girl camp counselors too and stuff like that. So there's always like, that's almost like your first introduction to black people is that they're mean and they're violent and abusive. And I want to talk a little bit more about that. That first of all, as we know, that's not all black people. Number two is that sometimes, and I know black people don't like this, is that there's also the role model culture, which is people say that black people need to better themselves, they need to stop acting ghetto and gangster, and that's going to make white people and everybody look at them good. No, there's still going to be racism and problems everywhere you go, really. Because, look, you had Black Wall Street, you had Rosebud or Roseland in Florida. You've had a bunch of black communities, and they got bombed and destroyed. Really, when black people tried to rise up and better themselves, there's stories that the government released HIV and crack and other things in the black community. So, and then gangster and hip hop culture. There's stories that there's been meetings by the government to kind of encourage that, so it encourages self-destructive and bad behavior, really, like to create more generational trauma and a tribalism of mediocrity, really, um, this whole entire model black people thing, it has ups and downs, really, but it really also means have integrity, but also stand up against problems, or when there is racism or other issues, we have to talk about it and support each other. So I remember like how I dealt with that, and I also remember how, again, there's a couple of reasons why that may have happened. Like again, sometimes people believe, and this happens in a lot of black cultures too, is that the best way to toughen a black kid up is to abuse them. That's why there's a lot of people who beat their kids with belts who are black. There's a lot of reason why people hit kids with dodgeballs and hurt them just to toughen them up, really. Or sometimes there's that generational trauma of, one of the reasons why black people beat their kids with belts is because it came from the slavery days when slave masters would do that to create compliance, and that got passed down. So maybe this is an extension of, kind of like compliance, really, where it's like, okay, you know what, you're kind of weak, or maybe you're too nice, or you always need to be on guard, really, and other things like that, So maybe that's why that happened, really. But I remember, again, unfortunately, I couldn't talk to my father about that because my father was a person that would be like, what, they're doing this to my son, flipping over tables, smashing furniture, screaming and yelling and hollering, and maybe just like not believing, and then you get worse. And then there's also the no snitch culture, which is another issue in the black community. Like obviously, if kids are being abused, or if people like me are wiping blood off my head because a camp counselor's throwing a dodgeball at me hard as he could, or if I'm limping because, or other people are limping because they're throwing dodgeballs at people, or people like me are walking away from trauma because this was like over 30 years ago. And then also there are people that started to hate the counselors and said, oh, well, we hate black people because of that experience, really. It's unfortunate that these people were not, charged. They were not fired, or that summer camp was not passed down, really. Well, I did not shut down, really. But that does, happen, really. It's an unfortunate thing. But there's a lot of lessons from this that ultimately, yes, there is generational trauma in the black culture, really. And I think sometimes when you see black boys or young children try to want to be successful, want to better themselves, or have some gifts, really, sometimes black people will sabotage their own people. And I don't mean to, this is not stereotype. Stereotype means that this is just saying this is how all black people are. This is this is the mindset of some black people where they're like, oh well, I want to treat you like shit, really, because of the generational trauma of when black people try to better themselves. White people and other people in America treat them like crap, really, or when black people have communities, they would be destroyed, really, or when black people went through slavery and got abused, really, they teach their sons or they teach younger children through physical abuse, through bullying and other things to toughen you up. Maybe in a way, this was them trying to make a man out of me. But also, it kind of goes into the other thing too, where there are some black people who hate other black people because of the ghetto and gangster culture or bad experiences, and this made me, like, as a young kid, start like not like my own skin color, start hating black culture, because I'm like, this is my first experience around a mass of black people where I got treated like that, really. Oh, well, you got beaten up, you got abused, you had people flicking your ear. They said, oh, well, you want to be president, you're going to grow up to be shot, you're stupid, you're retarded for thinking that way. Oh, well, you just try to be a know-it-all because, you're like 8 years old, you don't know better. And you're getting your ass whooped by, like, people who are in their who are, like, in their mid-20s, and they're, like, the shape of football players. It doesn't make you... it's really on them for what they brought there. But ultimately, it's a very unfortunate experience, really. And then also, too, it's bad because then you have, people hating their own race, or people saying things like, oh, or some black people being like, okay, well, when I was a kid, I used to get bullied by black people, so therefore, when I'm successful, I want to move away and be in the white communities and away from all the ghetto and the hood nigga stereotypes. And sometimes when you have bad experiences like that, this is how some black people think, or some part black people think, or like mean stuff like that, where I'm like, oh, well, these bad experiences stick with you. It's very unfortunate that this happened, really, and and also people just got to be mindful of that. When you treat people poorly, some people are going to maybe not walk away hating you, but having some racist thoughts, or some people um, like me will dissect and say, hey, hey, possibly all this came from other generational trauma that are passed down by black people, like how they treated me was some generational trauma that they have, and some things they're trying to pass on to me, really. But I also understand too, if I'm ever a camp counselor or work in a psych ward, I would not treat people like that. It's actually weird because I'm not a doctor or whatever, really, but I know that maybe if I was in the psych ward and there were some black kids that are misbehaving, I might be a little harder on them because of that generational trauma, to be like, hey, you know what? In the real world, you get shot or killed for acting out, but if you're white, you get like 100 chances, really. So I know that maybe I would be a person, if I was a nurse or whatever, to be harder on black kids who are misbehaving versus white kids, just to kind of toughen them up and be like, hey, you know what? The world's more meaner to you, so I have to be mean to you to prepare you for a tough world. And I think that that's almost an extension of what I've been through, and maybe how these counts grow. They may have grown up with parents that taught them the same way, and that happens in black culture, where people who are black are mean to other the people who are adults who are black or have black heritage or been through black racism will be harder on their children, or be harder on other people's children, or be as unkind or unfair or mean or abusive, to teach them that, oh, well, because the world's not nice to black people, we gotta just show you how unnice the world is. And I think that that's why they treat us that way. It was very sad, very, very bad, really, and unnecessary, really. And we should all treat people fairly. We shouldn't be like, oh, well, because because I'm black or part black, people were mean and harsh on me. That means I gotta be mean and harsh on every black kid as well, really, because I want to toughen them up, really. No, that's not that's not what you do, really, because that creates resentment, and that may even create people to be self-hating blacks, or be like, oh, well, when I get older, I'm just gonna hang out around white people and be like, oh, well, I don't want to hang out and help my own kind, really, because of what I've been through, really. So it's part of generational trauma. So that's one of my first stories I want to share.